Hello. Before we begin, a quick note. The Boy to Sleep podcast relies on you and sponsors, which means you will hear a quick advertisement before the beginning of tonight's episode. While the podcast is free, you are welcome to subscribe for just $2.99 per month, which supports the creation of this podcast and gives you an ad-free listening experience. Simply click the link in the show notes from your podcast app. Rest easy.
This episode is brought to you by Prime. Obsession is in session, and this summer, Prime Originals have everything you want. Steamy romances, irresistible love stories, and the book-to-screen favorites you've already read twice. Off Campus, Elle, Every Year After, The Love Hypothesis, Sterling Point, and more. Slow burns, second chances, chemistry you can feel through the screen. Your next obsession is waiting. Watch only on Prime.
Sierra has all the best active and outdoor brands for the super athletic stuff, like running gear for cruising up the trail. Woo! And the super athletic-ish stuff, like fishing gear for chilling by the creek. Nice cast. Fitness apparel to push for higher reps. You got this. And golf balls priced so you can afford to lose one. Or a few. Head to Sierra or Sierra.com for the brands you want at the prices that let you do it all. From athletic to athletic-ish, Sierra's got it.
Hello. Welcome to the Bore You to Sleep podcast. The podcast that will hopefully help you get to sleep. I am going to read an open source book, one that is not particularly interesting, but one that is hopefully boring enough to get you to sleep. Tonight's reading comes from Millie at Love's Extremes. The story talks of a romance that begins in the mountains between a mountaineer and a young woman called Millie. The book was written by Maurice Thompson and published in 1901. My name is Teddy, and I aim to help people everywhere get a good night's rest. Sleep is so important, and my mission is to help you get the rest you need. The podcast is designed to play in the background while you slowly fall asleep. For those of you who are new to the podcast, you may not know that it started from my own struggles with sleep. I wanted to create a resource for others facing similar challenges, and I'm so grateful for the amazing community we've built together. This podcast is self-made and self-produced. With the support of ads, subscribers, and patrons on Patreon, it enables me to keep delivering this podcast for free to those who need it. If you find the podcast beneficial and would like to support it, there are a few ways you can contribute. You can follow the podcast in your podcast app and leave a comment. You can also become a subscriber for $2.99 per month. This creates for an ad-free listening experience, as well as supporting episode creation. If subscribing is not possible, and I completely appreciate that it is not possible for everyone, an easy way to help is simply by leaving a review and rating in your podcast app. Even one sentence really helps out. If you would ever like to say hello to me, you can do that by visiting boytosleep.com, or even better, leave a comment in the episode and let me know where you're listening from. If you know someone out there who might also benefit from a good night's rest, you're always welcome to share this podcast as a resource with them. In the meantime, lie back, relax, and enjoy the readings. Millie at Love's Extremes by Maurice Thompson. Chapter 1. Mountain Dew. A man stood on the jutting shoulder of a mountain overlooking a long, narrow valley, whose scattering houses and irregular farm plats, seen through the clear air of that high region, appeared scarcely a gunshot distant, when in fact they were miles away. It was the early morning. The sun had barely cleared the highest peaks in the east, and the landscape, albeit a midwinter one, was wonderfully rich in colours. On the oak trees, the leaves still clung in heavy brown, green and russet masses. The hickory forests, though leafless, made bits of tender grey along the lower valley slopes, whilst high up toward the mountain tops, the billowy wilderness of pines, cedars, and chestnut trees added their variated patchwork that gradually rose and shaded off into the blue distance. In some places where storms, or the needs of man, had removed the oak woods, a dense frondous mass of young pines had leaded up with a greenness full of a soft yellow glow. The sunshine and the wind of the south were flowing over this scene, and there were fragrant odours and balsamic pungency in every wave. The man, a tall, shapely fellow, was a young Englishman who had lately come to the iron and coal region of Alabama to take care of extensive manufacturing and mining interests belonging to his family. Just at present, with a true English faith in the value of outdoor sports, he was hunting wild turkeys, or for that matter, whatever other wild game might chance to let him get within gunshot of it. He had left his hotel at Birmingham with the first hint of dawn, and had steadily tramped over the hills and mountain spurs, and through wild ravines and beautiful glades, without a sight of fur or feather. Now he stood on this airy height, flushed with the healthful exercise, a little disappointed and annoyed. But the mountain air of the south has in it a tenderly exhilarating influence which affects the imagination and lulls one into pleasant, though often rather vague dreams. No matter if Edward Morton was an intensely practical-minded man of affairs, the kind of Englishman who is willing to come to America and superintended ironworks and coal mines, he was, nevertheless, not wholly impervious to the poetry, the lulling magnetism of the climate and the scene. For a while he leaned on his gun, a long, heavy double-barreled piece. Then he took from his pocket a cigarette and match, seated himself on an old grey stone, and began smoking. In the midst of the valley below ran a rivulet, winding through the woods with a silvery shimmer, and out across the farms and past one little mill, on into a deep gorge of the stony hills. Morton had not found his surroundings in Birmingham quite satisfactory, notwithstanding the fact that he had fallen in love, after the old-time fervid fashion, with a fair young northern girl living there. The little mining town, cramped between the hills, full of rough folk, raw and new, could not be very attractive to a man who, no matter how practical and matter-of-fact in his disposition, had studied art and who still nursed the artist's dreams. As he sat there, with his blue-grey eyes slowly sweeping the valley, he was not as blithe-looking as a model sportsman should be. His dog, a small brown spaniel, sat down at his feet and eyed him lazily. No sound save the rustle of the wind in the trees, and a dull distant tapping of a woodpecker was disturbing the broad silence of the forest. The sky was intensely blue. Suddenly, a short puff of dampness came from the southwest, followed by a growl of thunder, a thing not usual in winter, even in that latitude. Morton arose and saw a heavy line of black cloud overhanging some conical peaks far away on the southwestern horizon. "Come, Nat," he said to his dog. "We must be going back. A nasty squall is coming. We shall get our jackets wet." Nat answered with divers canine antics, and the two turned away from the valley, the man walking with long firm strides, and the dog trotting perfunctorily by his side. Their way led among the flanking spurs and foothills of the range, now over great fragmentary boulders, now through yawning clefts and down winding defiles, sometimes on bare ridges of shale, under the dark odorous brushes of the pines. The cloud came after them, sending in advance its gusts and moist, fragrant air. A vast wing reached up the zenith, and a few big drops of rain pattered down. A morning shower in the mountains comes at racehorse speed. The swiftest birds are caught by it. A flock of noisy crows went flapping across the valley, striving in vain to outstrip the slanting flood that fell with a brood, washing raw from that rushing cloud. "We are in for a soaking, Nat," grumbled Morton, as he plucked up the collar of his shooting jacket. "A deuced bad outcome for our first day's shooting in America." Nat's tail was down, and so were his ears. He relished the signs of the weather, no more than did his stalwart master. A chilliness was creeping into the air, foretelling how disagreeable the rain was, to be sure. The very trees shivered as the sunshine was shut off by the overlapping cloud. It was just as the storm was about to break that certain sharp cries peculiar to the wild turkey reached the quick ears of sportsman and dog. The man stopped short and cocked his gun, as the spaniel darted away to a short distance, and then began creeping through the low underbrush, as a setter does when about to come to a point. In the next instant, 4 large birds were flushed, breaking from cover at about 40 yards, their wings making the woods resound with their loud flapping. Almost at the same moment, the bang-pang of Morton's gun, fired right and left, went echoing across the valley and battling amongst the hills. A cock and hen were stopped short and fell heavily. The dog sprang forward to lead his master to the game, and then came a blinding down gush of rain, with a roar like that of a cyclone. Morton with great difficulty got the birds, and after tying them together by the feet, slung them across his shoulder. This additional load and the hindering force of the rain made his further progress quite laborious. Nat resumed his drooping, mechanical jog-trot at his master's side. The young man leaned over and almost shut his eyes as he pressed on, catching quick breaths as the cold streams trickled down his back. His shooting jacket and trousers were meant to be impervious to water, but the chilling liquid was dashed by force of the wind against his neck and thence found its way down to his heels. He did not hesitate, under such stress of ill luck, to rush boldly against the door of a low, rambling mountain cabin and demand admission. His knock on the rough planks was heard by the inmates of the place, despite the heavy roar of the rain, and the response was immediate. "Come in, spoke a rather pleasing voice in the peculiar accent and intonation of the mountaineers of the region, as the door was opened, letting the hunter and his dog in, along with a dash of slanting rain. "Let me take them birds, stranger, and we'll get you by the fire. It's pretty audacious rainy all of a sudden, purty near drowned a fella." The speaker was a slender, almost slight man, near 50 years old, flaxen-haired, thin-faced, with a sharp nose and a straggling beard, still lighter than his hair. He took the brace of the birds off Morton's shoulder and threw them aside on the clean white floor. "I'll just put your gun up for you here," he continued, taking the weapon and leaning it against the wall in a corner of the room. Then he quickly fetched a chair. "Sit down and make yourself at home. I'll punch up the fire. It's got sorty low. I'll get some lighted knots." Morton found himself in a place whose features had once interested him. Glancing around the room, he saw 2 low beds, a few plain, split-bottomed chairs, an old queer bureau or chest of drawers, with glass knobs, some rude shelves, with ironstone dishes on them, a long flint-lock rifle, hanging in buckhorn forks over the door. One of the forks also held a coonskin bullet pouch and curiously carved powder horn. The fireplace before which he sat was broad and deep, roughly lined with jagged stones, picturesquely black with fleecy accumulations of soot from pine smoke. It was crossed by a heavy charred wooden crane, and on its broad jambs rested a curious collection of cob pipes, clay pipes, wooden pipes, and soft stone pipes, along with sundry ragged twists of brown home-raised tobacco. There was a low, wide window on one side of the room, and beside it Morton's eyes rested for a moment on a slim girl's form in a half-cowering position. She was so turned from him that he could see no more of her face than a rounded line of one cheek. There was a heavy brush of long, bright yellowish flaxen hair, a very delicate ear, and a glimpse of a brown throat and neck. One hand, rather large but shapely, lay along her lap, on the scant folds of a homespun cotton dress, the skirt of which could not quite hide her coarsely shod feet. There was something curiously striking in this crumpled little figure that held Morton's gaze for a time. Through an open door that gave into a smaller room, the intermittent hum of a spinning wheel made itself heard. Distinct from the clash and swash of the storm, a tall, angular woman walked back and forth, drawing out and reeling up the coarse thread as she was twisting. The man had soon fetched wood and pine knots for the fire, and presently a liberal flame wavered up to the mouth of the great old chimney. He turned to Morton and said, "Lay off your coat, stranger. We're going to get your shirt dry. It's outdacious and honourable fur to heave on a wet shirt." Morton smiled pleasantly. "Thank you, I will," he said, rising and stripping off the stiff jacket. "You are very kind. I am covering your floor with water." "Sure, that's nothing," replied the man, in a tone of gentle contempt. "If you'd see hit sometimes when I come in you might talk. Them little puddles hain't nothing at all. The Colonel and me just floods the whole house when he gets wet. Wonder if John hain't a coming pap?" This sudden inquiry came in a sweet, half-shy voice from the girl at the window. "She calls him John. I calls him Colonel," explained the man. Then turning to answer the question, "Oh, there's no counting for him. He's as likely to stay out all day and night as anyway. It doesn't make a difference to him whether it rains or not, does it, Millie?" The girl had turned her face toward the man when she spoke, but now she averted it again, a little flush gathering on the brown cheek. "He don't mind no weather, stranger. The Colonel don't, rain or sunshine. It's all the same to him, isn't it, Millie?" continued the host. "I wish he'd come on back home," exclaimed the girl. "That's what I wish." Morton had turned his back to the fire. He was astride on the chair, and the steam was rising vigorously from his wet garments. Out of the corners of his eyes, he kept glancing at the lithe, plump little figure by the window. He had the taste of an artist, and here was a model for brush or chisel to imitate. He was a genuine man, too, and here was a bit of rare feminine beauty, no matter how coarsely clad or how hopelessly uncultured. She had the grace of outline common to wild things, and there was that half-pathetic, half-glad beam in her face that appeals to a man's love of the innocent and his pity for the weak. Her head was small and well poised above plump shoulders. Her bust was full, yet girlish, giving just a hint of a girl that he used to date before he came to America. "Do you ever smoke a pipe, stranger?" inquired the host, offering Morton a cob pipe with a twist of tobacco. "Thank you. Yes, I will take some of your tobacco." "I have a pipe," said the young man. drawing from his vest pocket a small meerschaum, old and dark as mahogany. He had heard of the excellence of this mountain homegrown tobacco. It's pretty good, if I do say so myself. Most of them around here are glad to get Tom Whiter's back and smoke, aren't they, Millie? Mr. White thus introduced himself and his tobacco at the same time. At this point, Mrs. White quit her wheel and came into the room. She spoke to Morton pleasantly, as if she had known him, smiling cordially. "If you men folks don't care, I'll just join you for a whiff or two," she said, going to the chimney jamb and selecting a pipe. They formed a strange group around that cabin fire. Morton felt the democratic force of the situation and enjoyed it to the full. "Aren't you going to have a hand in this here general smoke, Millie?" said Mr. White, chuckling jokingly and looking, under comically drawn eyebrows, at the girl. "Now, Pap, you know I don't smoke at all," she answered quickly, getting up and leaving the room. Her movement was as light and nimble as that of a hare. "Of course she don't smoke, you know," said White to Morton, confidentially lowering his voice. "I was just yanking her fur greens. She knows when I'm a green in her, and she gets tiffy at me in a minute. She's as sharp as a darn needle, Millie is." Morton, whose eyes furtively followed the girl as she left the room, saw that the apartment into which she passed was neatly carpeted and furnished with a well-worn, easy chairs and table and a desk. Between the opening and closing of the door, he caught sight also of long sleeves of books and some pictures. The room appeared quite large, and arranged as if for a gentleman's study. The contrast between its almost elegant appointments and the arid blankness of the one in which Morton sat was so pronounced that despite his patrician self-control, a wave of surprise passed over his face. The quick eyes of the mountaineer saw this. That there air the colonel's part of the house, he hastily said, a trace of apology and disclaimer in his voice. "It just suits him. He's got an audacious sight of larnin' and plenty of money. He can buy whatever he wants." "Yes," said Mrs. White rather sharply. "He's right now staring under some tree or rock, waiting for rain to quit, and reading a book. Seems powerful queer to me." Morton was almost tempted to ask questions, so quick an interest had been generated by this gossip about the colonel. Certainly this was a strange home for a man of wealth and education. Possibly the colonel was some sport-loving gentleman from New Orleans, Mobile or Montgomery, who had taken these apartments in the cabin as a sort of shooting box. He thought, for he had heard much of the peculiarities and extravagances of rich Southerners, but his mental discussion of this subject was cut short by a sudden movement on the part of White, who sprang to his feet and elevated his hands. "Well, it's just too audacious, Sarah," he cried, as if utterly chagrined. "Just to think, the stranger came in wet and soaked and had no liquor. 'Bout like such as us, and frugal as we are," responded Mrs. White. "You'll find them under the bed, behind the sack of taters." White dived under the bed in question, and drew forth a large earthen bottle. Mrs. White fetched a large heavy tumbler, and handed it to Morton. Morton, with no light inward protest, submitted his lips to the proffered glass. His English taste for excellent drinks was never more deliciously surprised. What began as a formal, carefully guarded sip crept into a series of slow quaffs, ending in a final hearty gulp. White grinned delightedly. "It's good, isn't it, stranger? Don't we have the best way of getting to the very marrow of a fellow's neck of any liquor he ever tasted? If it don't get there, none don't. The Colonel says it's the best liquor that he has ever tasted, and he has travelled, he has. He's been in furrin parts, Rome and France, and them air places." Morton was quick to acknowledge that the brandy was surprisingly fine. It had the bouquet of old wine, the body of cognac, and the mellow fire of Scotch whisky, along with a faint trace of peach kernels. He thought of a certain London club in which he would like to introduce this sand mountain nectar. White partook sparingly of the precious beverage, and then carefully replaced the bottle in its hiding place under the bed. Meantime, the heavy throbs of wind and rain shook the cabin to its foundation. When the mountaineer returned to his chair by the fire, Morton inquired of him where the brandy was made. "Oh, I don't know wherever it was made, nohow. We calls it the Mountain Dew," said White, glancing furtively at his wife. "The peach brandy made at the sly little stills scattered among the mountains from North Carolina to Alabama is sometimes locally called Mountain Dew. It is not the drink of drunkards. In fact, the mountaineers, with now and then an exception, are remarkably temperate in the matter of tippling, but the jug of dew is the special implement of their hospitality." And that concludes tonight's readings. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the story of this mountaineer, and I hope you are feeling a little drowsy. If you're not quite feeling tired yet, please feel free to listen to another episode. In the meantime, I'll be working on bringing you a new episode very soon. Good night.